Examination with Mark Curran. We're in WSFI Catholic Radio Studios, WSFI 88.5 FM, WNDZ 750 AM. I am Mark Curran, your host. Our producer, Linda Pressey, is here with us. And Dr. James Thorp is our guest today. What a terrific guest, and you're really going to enjoy this show. I want to begin with a quick prayer just to make sure that we have our protection. In the name of the Father, and Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now at the hour of our death. Saint Michael, the Archangel, protect us. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Dr. Thorp, how are you doing, sir?
Such a privilege to be on your platform, cross-examination.
Thank you, Doctor. I really appreciate having you here. Doctor, let's begin just if you could go into a little bit about who is Dr. James Thorp. I'm
an average Joe. I'm a 70-year-old, just turned 70 years of age.
Congratulations. You're a board-certified obstetrician, gynecologist, and maternal fetal medicine physician for 44 years of obstetrical experience. Obviously, an extremely busy clinician. Your entire career, as you have been very active in clinical research with over 200 publications. Dr. Thorp has seen about 27,000 high-risk pregnancies in the last 4 years. He's going to talk about that. He has served as a reviewer for major medical journals and served on the board of directors for the Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine for 4 years. And he served as an examiner for the American Board of OB/GYN. He also, and thank you for this, Dr. Thorp, he also served in the United States Air Force as an obstetrician, gynecologist, having been awarded a health profession scholarship for his medical school education. Dr. Thorp testified in the U.S. Senate under the Bush administration in 2003 for his expertise in treating the fetus as a patient with in utero therapies. On December 7th, 2022, he testified in the Senate in a hearing with Ron Johnson and others.
My patients are women of reproductive age, pregnant women, and preborn babies. And what I've seen in my clinical practice has been a substantial, massive increase, unprecedented, in menstrual abnormalities prior to pregnancy, a substantial increase in infertility, a substantial increase in miscarriage, fetal death, and fetal malformation. We published many studies this year, over the last 2 years. Our latest study, which we've used from VAERS and CDC data, and we compared the COVID-19 vaccines over the last 15, 18 months with those of the influenza vaccine in pregnancy. And what we've seen is catastrophic. It's a danger signal like no others. I don't have time to review all of those problems, but what I will say is that the CDC and the FDA look for a twofold increase as a danger signal, a twofold increase. What our study showed was not twofold increases, but 50, 100, or 1,000 increases in menstrual abnormalities, for example, almost 1,200-fold increase compared to the influenza vaccine. How about miscarriage? 58-fold increase in miscarriage from the COVID-19 vaccines compared to that of the influenza vaccine. And I could go on and on. Fetal death, 38-fold increase. This is what I've seen. This is what the data shows. My patients are the rate-limiting factor of future generations of the human race. I want to ask why the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology, why the American College of OB/GYN, and why the Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine, all of whom I've served in a professional capacity in an outstanding fashion my entire career, why they are pushing this lethal vaccine in risking the future of all humanity.
Most recently, Dr. Thorp has been focusing on COVID-19 pandemic. We're going to talk all about COVID-19, folks. It hasn't gone away, and very, very intelligent, articulate, and knowledgeable guest on COVID-19 is Dr. Thorp. The pandemic and has published over 15 peer-reviewed scientific publications and a book documenting the dangers of the vaccine in women of reproductive age in pregnancy. Were you a cradle Catholic? Were you born a Catholic? Baptism?
I haven't heard that before. Cradle Catholic. Yes, I was. I grew up in a 12 years of Catholic education, took 5 years of Latin, almost went to the seminary. But
Wow.
fortunately, I went out on my first date in my adolescence, and I knew that wasn't in for me. So
good for you. And we need good Catholic doctors. They're in short supply. So we're so grateful for the existence of Dr. Thorp and his calling in terms of medicine. Did you go to Catholic schools?
12 years of Catholic education.
Beautiful.
Saint John the Baptist in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and St. Bernadette's in Westlake, Ohio, and St. Edward High School in Lakewood, Ohio, Brothers of the Holy Cross. Almost went to Notre Dame.
Ypsilanti is where a good friend of WSFI Catholic Radio, Tom Monahan, the founder of Domino's Pizza, that's where he threw down his first shop. That's where he opened.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, we love Tom Monahan. We're going to get into what this show is basically taking professionals and it's intertwining how faith and their profession come together. And I think it's very interesting in your case. I've been watching a little bit about you've been taking positions on, you've been on Tucker Carlson, you've been on all kinds of other, big name programs. So we're really blessed to have you on our show.
I'm blessed to be here.
Thank you so much for saying that. The COVID-19 vaccine. Let's go back in time. I want you to give our listeners an introduction as to how that vaccine came about and how you were first made aware of it and what initial concerns you had regarding that vaccine.
I want to be upfront and confession here. Repentance.
I can't grant you reconciliation, your pardon your sins because I'm not a member of the clergy, but whatever, go ahead.
Yeah, well, so I just want to say I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm military. I gave all my children vaccines. I was brought up in a traditional medical school. My eyes didn't start opening until around the turn of the century with regard to the corruption and fraudulence of the pharmaceutical companies. And it came along with really Tamiflu, if you remember that. I won't get into that. But then fast forward, my eyes were raised. And then during the first decade of this century, I became totally understanding that I had made gross mistakes and gross judgments in my intellectual academic pursuit. And I believed the powers that be, the CDC and the FDA and the pharmaceutical companies. I believed the medical journals, and I believed everything. I started rejecting that around 2010. Reason being is I actually began talking to so many patients.
What vaccines were you were troubling?
Well, I pushed in pregnancy. I confession. I pushed the influenza vaccine in pregnancy, and I pushed the pertussis vaccine in pregnancy, and I now realize that was a mistake, and I publicly have apologized for that. I did an academic and spiritual metanoia, if you will, and I'm speaking out against.
The listeners might not know what those vaccines are. I'm a male. I'm going to guess that most of the men out there don't know what those vaccines are. What are they proposing that those vaccines would do if they worked
in pregnancy?
Yes.
So yeah, the theory behind the influenza vaccine, which I am, was that it's a rapidly dividing virus. It's an RNA virus. So the whole idea was that, well, maybe there was an increased risk of dying from influenza during pregnancy, which probably there's not. That's still up for debate. So it was felt that we would push the vaccine in pregnancy. Unfortunately, there was never any studies. When I went back and looked at it, there still are no studies showing the efficacy of that. So that was, we were bamboozled. The other medication vaccine in pregnancy that I pushed was pertussis. And pertussis made a lot of sense to me because the pertussis vaccine, if you give it to mom, Now, babies are vaccinated with pertussis after birth, but the fact of the matter is in that first year of life, the infant is still at risk. The vaccine after birth for pertussis allegedly didn't kick in for a year. So there were babies dying in the United States of America from pertussis in the first year of life that the kids did receive their pertussis vaccines after birth, but allegedly it took a year to work. So the idea was to give the vaccine to the pregnant mom. The pregnant mom would develop antibodies, cross the placenta, and thus provide protection in that infant for the
Protection
first year
from
of life.
what?
Whooping cough.
Okay, whooping cough. Got it. Okay, thank you.
Pertussis.
And the first one you mentioned was the flu. Are you skeptical as to the benefits of the flu vaccine? Because what about people that have, asthma and other, autoimmune that they don't want to get the severe version of the flu?
I've spent thousands of hours, studying vaccines and reading the literature. I've published probably 20 or 25 articles just on COVID-19 and the vaccine and such. Yeah. So I do consider myself an expert, but what I will say is that none of all those studies were really very, very poor. For those of you that really want an in-depth insight, read Turtles All the Way Down. It's a book that was originally published by incredible researchers, anonymous, because anybody that publishes anything on vaccines, they become personally attacked and destroyed. So these are two anonymous authors, but they are heavily, heavily referenced. Turtles All the Way Down was published by a couple of named authors, if you will. They republished it. Mary Holland is one of them. She's a lead counsel for Bobby Kennedy's organization, CHD. And I can tell you that I've studied that book, and despite having been probably around for a decade, I may be wrong on that, but nobody has ever been able to refute anything in the book. And one of the things in the book that's really important is there's never been a randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled trial regarding a vaccine compared to placebo of any of the vaccines that are currently on the schedule. And that really is an abomination. You had asked me what tipped my hat to the COVID.
Started to see that vaccines weren't what they promised.
Early 2020, I had done my due diligence, and I had used hydroxychloroquine in pregnancy for 40 years. And I was also aware that for SARS-CoV-1 at the turn of the century, it was extraordinarily effective. It was published in I believe it was in one of Fauci's NIAID sponsored studies showing how safe and effective it was hydroxychloroquine against SARS-CoV-1. So when they came out in early 2020s and they started blasting me for prescribing hydroxychloroquine because it's unsafe, I knew something was up, because all the doctors have used it in pregnancy. In fact, the CDC and the HHS had bragged about how safe it was in pregnancy and breastfeeding month and children, but they took that off their website. I still have a copy of it, and you can get it on the Time Machine. And I've published that on slides, but you can still get that on their website where they bragged about it. And then they removed that from the website. And by the way, hydroxychloroquine was removed from several over-the-counter countries where it was available over the counter. It was removed prior to the epidemic.
So we're talking about hydroxychloroquine, and we remember there was a big controversy going back to the infancy of the COVID vaccine, and President Trump referenced it, and he was made fun of by the late night talks. And as soon as that came out, everybody that had anything to say about the drug being effective was deemed a quack or a lunatic or what have you. How is it administered? Is it a pill? Is it a liquid?
It's a pill. And it's, I can tell you that for the last many decades, not just me, many physicians of many different specialties would treat young women that had autoimmune disease, lupus or other autoimmune disease. And we would treat them with one 200 milligram pill twice a day. What I will say is that there was an orchestrated campaign to very, very unethical, immoral, illegitimate, illegal to destroy, to change history, really, to revise history, almost like it prophesies in the Bible about end times, people changing languages and changing times and changing history. It's really remarkable. I've never seen anything like it in my life.
Yeah.
So they had the audacity to tell me that something that I knew they were lying at, that, oh, you can't use that. You can never use it in pregnancy. You can't use it in this population because it's dangerous. I knew that was a lie. That is total lie, because I have personal experience and I knew the literature. I've been using it for 40 years in pregnancy. So that was a huge, huge problem. Why did they do that? Well, they did it because of very unethical, illegal reasons. They did it for the sole purpose of rolling out the vaccine. And it's really not a vaccine. They lied. They changed from a gene product to a vaccine, which is a huge illegal leap. You can't do that because a gene product requires much more rigorous testing.
Who's they?
The they, if I say they, I'm specifically referring to the military medical industrial complex. And that is a complex which I will refer to, or you can call it what you like, the deep state, or EPIC, the elite powers in control, the cabal, the elite forces that are unelected that are controlling the world. That's who they are. And right now I'm focusing on the military, the HHS, the CDC, and the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology.
So the military complex, folks, that's what we've essentially, most people have always thought existed to some extent. And those were the people that were high decision makers. For example, Dick Cheney, that profited off of wars and that seemed to, hunt for battles to put the U.S. in. And there's a lot of truth to that. And to dismiss it as conspiracy stuff is just not right. I mean, you could follow the money, and I'm surprised it's not spoken of more. Certainly in the Bush administration, there were leaders that were looking for war and battle and what have you. And I think it's a crying shame. We don't hear about the medical industrial complex. It's a term that's just starting out, and we haven't heard it along the same lines as the military. What Dr. Thorp is proposing to us is that, similar to the military, there's people out there in medicine that want to push certain medicines or certain vaccines because there's a lot of money to be made off of those. And is that how you would describe the medical industrial complex?
Not quite. Very close, but not quite.
Yeah.
1963, November 22nd, when I was in third grade in St. John the Baptist grade school, and Sister Bartholomew comes in and rips us out of the class and tells us our president was murdered, assassinated, because he wanted to take down, exactly as President Eisenhower, what is in his leaving speech, leaving the White House. He said, the greatest threat to the United States of America is a military industrial complex. That was the CIA and the FBI by and large at that point in time.
We present an address by Dwight D. Eisenhower. This is the farewell address for President Eisenhower.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. Akin to and largely responsible for the sweeping changes in our industrial military posture has been the technological revolution during recent decades.
How did the medical get wound up in that? Well, the situation, the problem wasn't rectified. The elite powers in control have advanced tremendously over the last 6 decades, enumerating a massive amount of wealth and power and control. And they have enveloped the medical complex into the military medical industrial complex. So it's all one large cartel right now.
You're coming in, you developed a cynicism because you have the wherewithal and the expertise to study some of these vaccines. They're not what they promise. So at the age of roughly late 50s, after having been in medicine for 3 decades, you're seeing things that make sense that didn't make sense before, and now you have a totally different opinion with regards to COVID, and COVID's introduced, and you're going to examine it in a way that maybe you wouldn't have 20 years ago. What is going through Dr. Thorp's head, and what does Dr. Thorp do as far as looking at this vaccine and seeing whether or not it's what it promises to be?
What I began doing was locally, in the local standard of care, we would be treating the disease here locally with a variety of safe options, which were extraordinarily effective, including hydroxychloroquine and some nutraceuticals and others. But then long about summer of 2020, I realized that, this is done to roll out the vaccine, and they're going to roll it out in pregnant women. And I can see it. It was a fait accompli. So that summer, I had designed the template for a clinical trial, a randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled trial that would have safely observed the rollout of the alleged vaccine in pregnancy. And I sent that to the powers that be. I sent that to President Trump. I sent it to, to Bill Gates and to the doctors, Fauci and such. And it was met with just mocking and scoffing. Well, we're not going to do a trial. Okay. But the point that I was making was I was very concerned about it. I had a very viable trial that could have been easily done. It would have taken 10 years to do, but it would have been double-blinded, randomized, and placebo-controlled with an annual interim analysis by a third party. Had we done that trial 1 year later, the drug would have been taken off the market, because I powered that study with a sample size of 70,000 to detect only a 5-fold increase in death from 1 in 10,000 to 5 in 10,000 over 10 years. Well, little did I know how stupid I was and how naive I was. That death rate was massive in the first year, and it would have been immediately picked up with a placebo-controlled trial, and the drug would have been immediately taken off the market in the summer of 2021. The emergency use authorization was completely fraudulent because it was illegal. They illegally buried data in order to make an EUA, emergency use authorization, legal. So they illegally enforced that. Operation Warp Speed was a bloody disaster. First of all, in my knowledge of vaccinology, a vaccine is worthless for a rapidly dividing RNA virus, just like it is influenza. And so it was destined to failure, as in influenza, it's destined to failure in COVID-19. So the best way to treat SARS-CoV-2 was the best way to treat SARS-CoV-1, which is with nutraceuticals, including vitamin D and hydroxychloroquine. Operation Warp Speed was a bloody disaster. They had used the influenza vaccine for 60 years, 60, before it was approved for pregnancy use in 1997. So, taking a drug like this, it was a total planned fait accompli to roll out a massive, expensive, $1 trillion, possibly annually, ad infinitum cash cow for the military medical industrial complex. It usually would take at least 10 years, if not 60 years, to follow up a vaccine in pregnancy, because you need to get all the outcome of the offspring. And, as you know, the government does not like us. The government doesn't care about your health. The government cares about taking your money, taking power away from you, taking your freedoms away from you, and controlling you. That's all they care about. This is a rogue government right now that is totally captured and totally irresponsible with their job of protecting the American people. There's no way around that. You cannot roll out drug intervention like this. Then we come around to 2020, latter part, when Pfizer rolled out to the public December 14th, 2020 to February 28th, 2021. That's a 10-week rollout. And I had that data, CDC had that data, HHS had that data, American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology had that data in March 1st, 2021. Spoiler alert, they tried to hide it for 75 years. 75 years they tried to hide it. And it was the deadliest drug, medical intervention, vaccine, call it whatever you want, ever rolled out in the history of medicine. A whistleblower from Pfizer released that to the entire world in the spring of 2020. So I had it in the spring of 2020, released to the public on April 1st, 2022.
I'm going to just give back by way of background. Stephen Mosher, who's been a guest of my show a couple of times, foremost expert on China, has laid out the reasons why he believed the virus started in a laboratory in Wuhan, China. It's not for this show. For this show, we're talking about the virus and the problems with the virus. If you're listening or joining us late, our guest is Dr. James Thorp. He's a foremost expert. He's been in practice of medicine for 40 plus years. He's been on all these programs talking about this. So really, folks, pay close attention. He's telling us why the vaccine for COVID-19 is the most dangerous vaccine ever.
It's just not my opinion. That's fact. And I've been stating that publicly around the world for now 2.5 years. And since I've had that data, this is not Jim Thorp's opinion. This is Pfizer's own data. And you go to Pfizer 5.3.6, your listeners can go to it right now, put into a DuckDuckGo, not Google search engine, and put in Pfizer 5.3.6 PHMPT, or just go to my Twitter account, JATHORP, Mary Frances Mary, MFM. You'll go there, you'll pull that up, and you'll see on page 7, table 1, 1,223 dead in 10 weeks after the vaccine. Never before in the history of medicine has we rolled out a drug that's been that deadly and that injurious. And they tried to hide it. They tried to hide it for 75 years. Go look at it. And then on page 12 of that data, of that same 30-page document, page 12, it was a highly lethal in pregnancy. It was associated with a miscarriage rate of 81%. It was associated with a fetal death or stillbirth rate 5 times that what would be expected in the general population by national statistics. It was associated with a neonatal death rate of 8-fold higher than what we have ever seen in this country, in the United States of America. So these are facts, and 16% of the breastfeeding babies had problems with it. Those are facts. They're incontestable. They're irrefutable. What did they do? Did they make a confession like I did at the onset of this program? No, they didn't. Do you think they said, okay, let's tell the world this horrible data. We made a mistake. We hurt some people. Let's stop it and pull this off the market. Did they do that? No. You know what they did? The HHS and the CDC and Dr. Tommy Shimabukuro, the lead author on the New England Journal of Medicine article that pushed it in pregnancy about 4 months later, in addition to Eric Rubin, the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, who is highly corrupted, they took with HHS and Mark Weber, the deputy secretary of HHS, designed a $13 billion psychological operations warfare campaign. Instead of confessing and being transparent with the global population, they tried to lie, bury it, and put out $13 billion distributed to almost 300 sectors of our society in the United States of America, including all the boards, to mandate and tell them and convince them with false information that it was necessary in pregnancy, safe in pregnancy, and effective in pregnancy, all of which were lies.
That's your foremost expertise, being an obstetrician, OBGYN. You know more about pregnancies, and having done it for so long and having written on it so extensively, you know more about it than virtually anyone else out there. I know the listener who's driving in their car is got to be asking themselves, one is the they. Now, we talked about this medical industrial complex, but I mean, do they meet somehow, and do they figure out Did they devise a strategy how to all get rich off of a vaccine, or how does this work? Or are they simply tools of the devil? Satan's using them because of their disregard for life and the sanctity of life, or what is it? How is it they?
Again, I can only speculate on that, Mark. I know if you look at the World Economic Forum, you look at the elite powers in control who are all non-elective. You look at Soros, you look at Gates, you look at the UNICEF, you look at the UN. These are all controlled by elite powers that were not elected. And it's a military medical industrial complex. The reason why the military acquired the medical is because there's some strong evidence now, and you'll hear Dr. Peter McCulloch, many experts talk about this, that the DoD was intimately involved with this program, especially Moderna. Massive amounts of very profitable enterprises. Let me just give you an example. The amount of money that they make off the American people in 1 year is $3.5, not billion, $3.5 trillion. And how do I know that? I can go into that, but it may be a little bit deep. So then you look at another source of their income. Look at according to this documentary coming out on the childhood sexual trafficking, that's a $30 trillion a year industry.
So, Doctor, I want to back up just a little bit as to some of the things you said with regards to that. And the people that you named, by the way, every one of them, to my knowledge, is either an atheist or an agnostic. Every one of them is a proponent of population control. And we do know that these people do meet in secret, in that there have been world forums convened, they've been written about, they've been spoken of. We know that exists. You are not in a position right now where you could be let's say you were the head of the Justice Department, where you could indict these people on a RICO, which is a conspiracy in which they committed certain acts in concert with each other. Is that what you're saying? You believe that they do, but we don't have the evidence as to how this medical industrial forum is communicating with each other, do we?
We have plenty of evidence. I would just refer your authors to RFKJ's book and also to Peter Bregan's book. It's all laid out in there. You'll see all the meetings. There's multiple different organizations around, including the World Economic Forum, the think tanks that meet up in Sun Valley, Idaho annually. You have several you have the Aspen Institute, which meets annually in Aspen, Colorado. And I was at one of those meetings. So these are real live people that meet, that have they're closed venues. Nobody's allowed in them. So there's ample evidence, but I really don't want to get into that. But I think I know where you're headed. This is ultimately convened by Satan.
You are listening to WSFI Catholic Radio 88.5 FM, 750 AM, and the opinions of Dr. James Thorp are not necessarily the opinions of the radio station. We think the world of this doctor, kind of all over the place on this virus, doctor. And maybe it's because I don't understand science as well as I should. One of the concerns for me is the fact that we used fetal tissue in developing these vaccines. And I don't know why the Vatican and why the Catholic Church thought that it was okay. And it just, it seems bothersome. We've never been a religion that believes the end justifies the means. We've never been a religion that believes that you could use what's intrinsically evil to achieve your goals. But somehow in this case, the Catholic Church was silent in using what I think the church is uniformly agreed upon, and that's that the killing of unborn children is wrong. And yet we took the fruits of that, if you will. They're not really fruits, and developed a vaccine in doing so. That's kind of bothersome, isn't it?
I would not pick on the Catholic Church because it's all the churches. And by the way, all those churches got part of that $13 billion from the Mark Weber, the Deputy Secretary of the HHS, to con them in and bribe them like they bribed the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology into pushing that organization and making them they can't get out of that contract. They have to push the vaccine, because they signed a contract that they are not allowed to deviate from the narrative of the HHS and CDC. And that's what they did at 300 other sectors, including our Catholic Church and our non-Catholic Protestant churches, including imams, including individuals, including higher up officials in all of these. So not only did you bribe the doctors, but you bribed the pastors, okay, and the priests. Not all of them, but many of them. And so
Right.
the two most trusted professions, your pastor, my pastor, and my physicians, they lied. They took the bribe. And where do you get the most trusted information from? Your doctor and your pastor? Not anymore. They're corrupt. Don't believe them. Don't believe any physician.
And this is a Catholic radio station, and I personally do criticize the Catholic Church and hold them to a higher standard. I believe it is the church instituted by our Lord. I believe that the Catholic Church, because it has such a high percentage of Christendom, so many more people are Catholic than anything else, that they should be better than that. And yet the Catholic Church, the same church that spoke out, is essentially the only church in the world to speak out against birth control and the evils of all of that, and Humana Vitae, is the church that bought into all this and pushed it. And I just think it's wrong that they did so. I've listened to a number of your interviews on other forums. What we can anticipate are the long-term effects of COVID-19. And before you go there, doctor, I'm going to make a confession of my own. I took it. I'm the vaccine. I'm somebody that suffers from asthma and bronchitis and all kinds of other respiratory ailments. And as a result of that, my doctor, who is a faithful Catholic, the problem is a lot of us aren't as smart as you are in the sciences, and we rely on others. That I took it, and maybe it was wrong. What's going to happen to me long term? What's going to happen to other people long term that took this vaccine?
We're in uncharted territory. Mark, and so I will. There's a lot of opinions out there, but if you take, like, for example, Dr. Ben Marble, who is one of my freedom fighter colleagues, along with, Dr. McCulloch and Corey and Urso and Cole and all the rest of them. It's very, very concerning that they have all been attacked aggressively, and they have all stood up for the truth. They have tried to show the problems with the vaccine, and they've been persecuted for it.
So I'm going to allude to one study that you referenced in another forum, that potentially the population of the U.S. is going to decrease by 2/3 within just a handful of years. What could you talk to us a little bit about that study?
What I can say, Mark, is that we're prognostication is pretty much worthless because we're in uncharted territory. But Ben Marble predicted at the very end that there's going to be a high mortality rate, very high, from every human being that took the vaccine, even one or two. That's what he says. And when I go back to my 2020 study that I designed, I totally missed all the short-term deaths. I didn't think there would be this many people killed by the vaccine. I'm shocked. And Dr. Marble was saying everybody that gets this shot is going to eventually die. And I didn't really believe him. So I planned my study based on only a 5-fold increase from chronic diseases, from not a primary cause, but a exacerbation of chronic diseases, asthma, arthritis, autoimmune disease, cardiac disease, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease. All these others would kill people 5-fold greater over 10 years. So I implicated that this shot was going to exacerbate over the long term deaths from chronic diseases. And that's what I was focused on. So Ben Marble might be right. Unfortunately, just in the last couple of weeks, I've seen 2 pregnant women who haven't had, they had 3 of the COVID vaccines. They haven't had the last one for 18 months. So they're in a subsequent pregnancy. I'm seeing the exact same problems, which is very disturbing. And now we're seeing the death rates all over the world are massively increased on death of unknown cause. We're seeing depopulation in every single country in the world. The population rates are declining. Look at the Substacks that have just been published this week. We're looking at every country in the world having massive decline in birth rates. We're talking about an event in the globe which is unprecedented, and there's only one unifying potential cause. It's the vaccine. My primary practice, my employed practice, is in the Midwest, but my unemployed practice, which I do pro bono, is all over the world, and I get calls from all over the world and all over this country. There is hope. If you've had a vaccine, don't ever take another one.
All vaccines?
So I would never trust any vaccine ever again, because they know that they're killing us and they're still pushing it. How can you trust a government that knows that they're pushing a deadly medication? You're really going to trust them with another medication? I wouldn't. So, just using RFKJ's data. And by the way, this is an incredible, knowledgeable person. He knows more about vaccinology than 99% of physicians right now. RFKJ is one brilliant scholar. So if I'll quote his, in 1972, right around there, the incidence of autism was 1 in 10,000. Last year, it was 1 in 32. That's a 278-fold increase. What do you attribute to? Well, I think that it is multifactorial, but the number of vaccines went up almost tenfold in that time for kids, from 7 to 70. So,
right.
You have to put that into your differential diagnosis, or that one's Overton's window, so to speak. If you don't put that in there, you're not a real scientist. Are there other factors? Yes, I'm sure it's multifactorial. I'm sure that the horrible food products that we've been eating, the environmental toxins, the atrazenes, the glyphosates, and so many others, the dirty EMR, the cell phones. I'm sure all of those have maybe contributed, but you have to look at the vaccines. Yes, we are being conditioned. We know that when I say take away all the vaccines and only implement them back after a randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled trial has been done. Now they'll say, oh, Dr. Thorp, that's unethical because there's so many vaccines that are proven effective. Oh, really? I don't believe that statement. And I want to see a randomized placebo-controlled double-blinded trial before it comes back. And I don't want it done by the pharmaceutical industry either. I would say that it is unethical and immoral to not do a randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled trial. That's the way I would answer the fraudsters in the pharma industry.
So you're listening to WSFI Catholic Radio, 88.5 FM, WNDZ 750 AM. And I am Mark Curran, your host of Cross-Examination. Our guest today, Dr. Thorp, just a terrific guest, and you're learning so much in listening to him, I know. And Dr. Thorp has referenced recently RFKJ, and that's, of course, Democrat presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the son of Robert F. Kennedy Sr. I think that he does represent much of what the Catholic Church teaches. He represents much of what the Catholic Church believes in. I think he falls short on the issue of abortion when I'm talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but he's a great voice out there because he shows the same courage and heroism that his father did 50 some odd years ago. Are these people, when we talk about these people that are doing this and pushing the vaccines, once again, are they driven by money? Are they driven by population control? Do they want people to die, as Gates and Buffett and so many others on the left are proponents of population control? Or are they just emissaries of the devil? The devil uses them because they're already in the house of evil, and they're easily used. And in addition to that, are the media complicit because they're useful idiots and they just don't understand it? Or do they have an agenda with regards to all of this?
We know that by Project Mockingbird, the CIA has captured all of the media, and all of the medical journals, almost all the medical journals, and all the hospital facilities are controlled by the military medical industrial complex. They march to the tune of, he who pays the piper calls the tunes. You see that with Tucker. Why did he get yanked off? He was making him billions of dollars, but that wasn't important. Rupert Murdoch cannot handle truth, and he will discredit him and fire him, even if he loses a massive amount of money. Why? Because their money is limitless, but they can't have their money flow interrupted. The money flow is being paid by the pharmaceutical companies, 75% of Fox's revenue. Let's look at Anderson Cooper, CNN. Look at that horrible corruption. What a horrible monster he is. What a horrible, unethical, immoral person and illegal. He's telling lies, and he took $5 million, I believe. Do your due diligence. He took $5 million into his personal account from Pfizer to push this lethal vaccine on the American people. Fathom that. You can't ever design a vaccine. First of all, this was not a vaccine. It was a gene product, a very dangerous gene product that I would never take or never let my children take or never let my patients take. But more importantly, I understand biology. I understand medicine. I've been doing this for 44 years. I know that when you have a rapidly dividing virus, you can't contain it. You can't contain it with a vaccine, just like you've never been able to contain the influenza. They have to do Russian roulette every year to pick out which strains are going to get because there's so many rapidly mutating. They are addicted to trillions of dollars of revenue, and they're all bought off. Look at the CDC and the HHS is owned by the pharmaceutical country. Totally different than back when in 1986, when Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan, they came begging to him on his knees. He was in a position of authority. It's totally the opposite now. The corporate kleptocratic regime owns this government.
I also want to point out too, because this whole thing was not just pushed out by mainstream media, it was pushed out by politicians. And if you examine their Federal Election Commission filings, you could see every single politician that tweeted to push the vaccine, pushed all of the narratives that the government wanted to assist in making sure that they mass vaccinated the population. They were all taking money from Big Pharma. And so I think the remedy to restoring the integrity of the medical field is to make sure that our politicians are not doing the bidding of Big Pharma and then putting our physicians in a position where they're going to feel like that they're up against politicians and the government. Or losing their license, right? Or doing the right thing, or following their Hippocratic oath, right?
I mean, Linda, John McCain wanted campaign finance reform, and the bulk of the Republican Party didn't want it. So I mean, that's why this radio station doesn't essentially toe either party lines, and we're instead very open to truth and just trying to proclaim the truth. Once again, you're listening to WSFI 88.5 FM and WNDZ 750. Dr. James Thorp has been our guest. He's been a terrific guest. He really speaks incredibly intelligently on the COVID-19 vaccine. Doctor, we only have a little time left. What's the message you want to leave them with?
The message is, do not trust your doctor. They're all bought off. We all have gag orders on us. Same thing with the nurses. If they deviate from the narrative, they put their life at risk and their job at risk, just like I have put my job at risk for aggressively attacking the corrupt organizations of the HHS, CDC, the New England Journal of Medicine. I've called out personally all these actors by name and by face on my social accounts that have been paid to promote this deadly drug. So don't trust them, and don't take any more vaccines. Get out of the system. Anything with Pfizer has produced, put them out of business. They're the most corrupt corporation in the history of the world. They lost a $3 billion lawsuit for fraud in 2009. They are the most penalized company with proven criminality and fraud than any other organization that the DOJ has ever prosecuted. Go to your pharmacy and say, I want a generic equivalent. Give me the same drug. Give me an alternate from a different company. Look at Al Gore. He's a politician who's dead set on not only wiping out the people, depopulation, he stated it, but he wants to kill all the farm animals and wipe out the whole farming industry because of 30% of carbon footprint. Well, this jet flies around in his massive carbon footprint jets to his massive carbon footprint meetings all over the world, to his massive carbon footprint homes all over the world. They don't care about you. They want power. They want control. God prophesied through his prophet Hosea. In Hosea chapter 4, verse 6, God said, this is prophetic. God said, my people die for lack of knowledge. 2,800 years ago, this prophecy has never been more fully fulfilled than with the military medical industrial complex putting out $13 billion of misinformation to get people to take this deadly drug. Hosea 4:6, my people die for lack of knowledge. We are dying for lack of knowledge.
Forgive them for what they do not know, right? But these people know what they were doing, and it was very orchestrated. And that's where the masses are going to have this come to Jesus moment now and realize that, look, we've put too much trust in government. Our trust is supposed to be with our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, right?
You've been listening to another episode of Cross-Examination with Mark Curran and our wonderful host, Dr. James Thorp, and our wonderful producer, Linda Precia. And wow, just so much information and a lot of scary information. Are we in the end of times? Dr. Thorp mentioned that. The late Cardinal George told me that there were all the signs as far as being in the end of times. What do we have to say about the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine? Well, we're going to leave that up to you. That's Dr. Thorp's opinion, and we believe that he is a good man and that his opinions are based in sound logic, but we're not proponents of necessarily that opinion or any other. That's why we give a forum and an avenue to have those opinions come out so that the listener can make an informed choice. Similar to global warming, I'm somebody that does not believe in global warming one bit. I believe that we are called to be good stewards of the earth, and that we've failed oftentimes on that, but that doesn't mean that the climate is somehow going to blow up in the next 10 years, as you've seen the AOCs and other politicians say. I think that's silly nonsense. So you're called to do the right thing. You're called to be a faithful Catholic out there. You know, how do you know when the church is telling you one thing and then you have a schism in the church and others in the church telling you another thing? I think you got to trust Jesus, and that's, divine mercy. Jesus, I trust in you. And I think that that's a prayer that we all need to make, is the divine mercy, the chaplet of divine mercy, and just put our trust in the Lord. And whatever happens, happens. I mean, our faith has to be in God, and we can't be looking to all these other things to fill that. And it's just not going to happen. And I think that's why, from my perspective, I'm somebody that went out and got the vaccine. I'm somebody that believed. And even after hearing Dr. Thorp, I don't know what to think of the vaccine. I still don't. I'm not, that's not an area that I have great expertise in, nor is it an area that I have time to dedicate great expertise. If I die, so be it. My only concern really is that I go to heaven when I die. But I think that one thing that did strike me during the COVID-19 was just how afraid of death people are, or afraid of anything. I mean, just the lengths that people went to with these masks, and how they were essentially became mask Nazis towards others that didn't have their mask upright, and how they wouldn't allow people to come to their house that didn't have a vaccine, and how, just all these other things, and driving in a car with nobody else in the car and you have your mask on, or walking in a park on a beautiful day and nobody's around you and you have your mask on and what have you. That's a sign of people that are clinging to life on earth as though that's the only thing there is. Well, it's not. You're going to die, and it may be tomorrow. Maybe it won't be for a little bit, but in any event, get right with the Lord, because that's what matters. He will bless you. He will protect you. He will give you the graces to survive this world and to make it into eternity in heaven. And that's the end game. So thanks again for listening, folks. Have a great week, and we can't wait to talk to you again. God bless.